The longer I am in the ministry, the more I have developed a healthy respect for the enemy of our souls. You know, when you're younger and you start out, you think you can carry on and wing it, and God's power is there, you can do it. And then you find out in a not so subtle way that the enemy of our souls will do everything possible to try to derail you.
No matter how hard we try to keep sin at bay, we're only human and as a result susceptible to the schemes of the enemy. How can we mind the gap and stay close to God? Find out today. Can God be trusted? When you pray for something and God doesn't answer your prayers, or if the situation gets worse, what do? Are you able to believe that He's in ultimate control, or do you begin to question Him? Ravi's series this week deals with that question. When disappointment and heartache hit, how do we avoid slipping into that gap of disbelief in God's control? Let's listen as Ravi begins part 2 of his message, Mind the Gap.
The second gap that we find in thinking we know so much is our propensity to believe certain things. We end up sometimes believing something because that's what we really want to believe. In economics, in our finances, I'll never forget one of the well-known New York Yankee players a few years ago. I won't name him, but it is in the New York Times writ large. He had at that time been offered a $91 million contract by the Red Sox to leave the Yankee organization, come and play for the Red Sox. And he was trying to get the Yankees to up theirs, but they only went up to 89 million, not to 91 million. So he went out that day to talk to the owners and the negotiators. And when he walked into the house, and the New York newspapers quote, and I say this is exactly what they said in that paper. As she says, as I saw him walking in, by the expression on his face, I knew he'd been turned down. It was the saddest day in our lives that he was offered 89 million and not 91 million. Somewhere in his heart, he actually began to believe that that was a tragedy, that he was suffering immensely, and that his talent was worth a lot more than that. The political mind games we play when we want to believe something, and this is not to be taken as pro one party or another party. But I so remember sitting in front of the television utterly flabbergasted when former Governor Gray Davis was speaking to the press, utterly dismayed at the carryings on of Mr. Schwarzenegger in his private life. He said, this thing is unconscionable. What sort of things are these? At the same time announcing that the next day Mr. Clinton was going to come and speak on his behalf. And you say to yourself, just a minute, something is missing here. If it's wrong there, why was it not wrong in the other place also? All that is called in defense of a behavior, however driven, is not the point. Yes, the passions play a part, and we do not minimize the fact that in reality, lives do go wrong, lives do get broken, lives do get shattered, and thankfully God is able to rebuild and put those lives back together. So I'm not speaking in any pejorative sense of the fact that these things, anytime they happen, are utterly unimaginable. That's not what I'm saying. All I'm saying is that the rationalization takes place because of the will to believe in a certain direction. And we will justify the most irrational. Not only do we find this breakdown because of the limited knowledge, and then we see it because of our propensity to believe. So I see the bridge of this thought leading me to my third one. But here's the verse I want to leave with you as I depart into the next context. It is what Jesus said to the people in His day. To what can I compare this generation? They're like children sitting in the marketplace and calling out to each other. We played the flute for you, but you did not dance. We sang a dirge for you, and you did not mourn. For John came neither eating nor drinking, and they say he has a demon. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say here is a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners. But wisdom is proved proved right by her action. What Jesus is really saying to them is, we couldn't win you over anyway. When John came, you found he had no laughter, you mocked him. When I came, you found I had no legalistic bone to what I was saying, and you mocked us. But wisdom will live by what it knows to be true. You are like little children in a marketplace saying, we played the flute, you did not dance, we sang a dirge, you did not mourn. You are the ones who lack wisdom, because nothing we can do will satisfy what it is you want. Whatever we do, you want us to do the opposite. And that's what happens in the skeptic's mind. So that leads us to the third. It is not only the finitude, it is not only the propensity to believe, but it is this power of deception that we face. And the longer I am in the ministry, the more I have developed a healthy respect for the enemy of our souls. When you're younger and you start out, you think you can carry on and wing it, and God's power is there, you can do it. And then you find out in a not so subtle way that the enemy of our souls will do everything possible to try to derail you. In the subtlest forms, using fatigue, using overwork, using success, using material blessings, using friendships. And I have seen this seduction take place so often now that it actually merits what C.S. Lewis said it ought to be brought to your mind and mine. He said it so importantly. He said this: there are two extreme responses we have to the devil. Number one is to completely ignore him, and the other is to develop an unhealthy interest in him. But Lewis understood the machinations of this enemy of our souls very well. And I want to just take one point now to sustain how insightful he was in reminding us of the capacity that the devil has to deceive you and me. And he takes just one slender thought. I want you to follow me, because this may be hard to gauge, but you must follow me here. He says this in his book, The Screwtape Letters. He says the senior devil, Screwtape, writing to Wormwood, his nephew, to teach him how to seduce those who are getting closer to God and draw them away. He says this thing very carefully: work on their horror of the same old thing. The horror of the same old thing is the greatest passion we have put within the human heart, says the devil. Work on their horror of the same old thing. He says, people get tired of the same old routine. And if you can use that, you can derail them. And you tell me when I've finished reading these two paragraphs if that's not precisely what has happened in our time. Writing now decades ago in Screwtape Letters, Lewis draws this imaginary conversation between Screwtape and Wormwood, first on how to work in the people in the church. Here's what he says to them. He says, substitute for faith something else, because you have to get them to being beyond merely Christian. Make it Christianity, and don't let them stop at being merely Christians. Christianity and culture, and new psychology, and faith healing. Substitute for the faith some fashion with a Christian coloring. Work on their horror of the same old thing. The horror of the same old thing is the greatest passion we have produced in the human heart. Examine where the church is today and tell me if that's precisely not what's happened. We are not content to be mere Christians anymore. We must be Christians and as you get into worship sometime, one sad book has been written recently by a retired minister. The church has passed me by. Think of men and women in their senior years, raised with music, with hymns. We're passing them by. We don't want to minister to them anymore because it's the same old thing. We can't be content with the richness and the grandeur of this age-old message. We want it to be Christianity plus. This is a dangerous seduction, and we have swallowed it, hook, line, and sinker. And I tell you what, it won't stay for the present either. It'll have to keep moving because we are being worked upon for the horror of the same old thing. Not the same old love, not the same old commitment, not the same old passion, not the same old integrity. Make it plus, make it plus, make it plus. And now listen to what he says about the world as Screwtape counsels Wormwood. Pick out the pleasure of eating and exaggerate it to the power of gluttony. They love change, so twist it into a demand for absolute novelty. What will actually happen then, Wormwood, is this: it will diminish pleasure while increasing desire. Did you hear that? It will diminish pleasure while increasing desire. Now, here's the clincher of a line. The greatest triumph we will have is to elevate the horror of the same old thing into a philosophy so that nonsense in the intellect may reinforce corruption of the will. You hear that? Nonsense in the intellect will reinforce corruption of the will. Have you ever heard such nonsense across the airwaves as we now do? All the things that laws want to change, so that even when a society comes up and says we cannot justify late-term abortions, there are intellects out there who says we're going to fight this one too. The intellect has been corrupted. It has seized upon the will. And I say to you, Screwtape is doing his work in our society, both to the church and to the world. Isn't it unbelievable what happens when we think there is a gap, and that gap is real? We say we forget our own finitude. We set aside our own propensities. We forget the enemy of our souls. Mind the gap.
That concludes day 2 of Ravi's message, Mind the Gap. Are you having a hard time dealing with a situation where you question God's willingness to work all things together for good? This complete message may be just what you need. If you see a gap between what you believe God should be doing and how He seems to be working...